Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so glad to have you. I'm Janis Hazel, coming to you from Detroit, Michigan. As you can see, our lovely waterfront. It actually rivals you down there in Florida, in various areas. I am so glad to be sitting in for your regular host with Dozelle Varner and Kim Varner with Dialogues with Dozy. Tonight, we have an incredible guest who is very, very versed in all things stress and mental health. It took us a while to get him because he's very busy, has a very active client base, but we have him here tonight, and that is Dr. Ural Hill. Dr. Hill is a clinical psychologist. He has a doctor of philosophy from Clark Atlanta University. Doctor of Philosophy and Counseling and Psychological Services. He is also a pastor of a church here in Detroit, Michigan. He has a Master of Divinity in the Sociology of Religion from Morehouse School of Religion in Atlanta, Georgia. And he is the principal psychologist on staff at H.O.T.E.P Christian Services, Inc. And H.O.T.E.P stands for Healing Ourselves Through Excellence and Preparation, H.O.T.E.P. So without further ado, I want to bring Dr. Ural Hill into the conversation to talk all things stress and mental health.
Hello, how are you? Thank you. Thank you
I'm
so
fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hill. So let's jump right into it. You are a clinical psychologist, and just a disclaimer, we both went to the University of Michigan and have a number of things and friends in common. But our intersection really began because I didn't know him in college. Dr. Hill is ahead of me, so he's older than I am. However, so I actually met him in Detroit through other friends and through businesses when I was interviewing him on 910 AM Superstation here in Detroit about his family's entrepreneurial endeavors, his father being one of the first Black gas station owners in the city of Detroit. And so through that dialogue, we got to know each other, and that's how we knew that we knew a number of people who all went to the University of Michigan. However, last year, I was experiencing a number of physical challenges. Tetanitis, my ears were ringing at night when I was trying to sleep, which I love sleeping, and that was keeping me from one of the things I love to do, which is sleep soundly. I was also having some neurological challenges, tremors. I thought they were perhaps mini seizures or mini strokes. My mouth was just moving involuntarily. And then I have a skin disorder, which is vitiligo, which is a discoloration or loss of pigmentation of your skin. Michael Jackson is very well known for having vitiligo. And so it was being controlled through a therapy. However, it suddenly just started spreading. And I do have to say, I have a fear of vitiligo spreading and changing my complexion to that of being white or spotted. So I'm dealing with that. However, I started going to a number of specialists, a neurologist, about why was my mouth moving involuntarily in the midst of talking. And as a radio and TV personality, you can imagine that is very troubling. Also, what was going on with the tetanitis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, ringing in my ear. And then the skin discoloration, which had been managed through various therapies. And so each of these specialists, the neurologist, the ear, nose, and throat doctor, and the audiologist, and the dermatologist. They all asked me about stress and how is my stress, which I said I'm fine. I didn't think I was under any stress. I mean, I have gone through stress, and that's why I've effectively retired from working on Capitol Hill, being a lobbyist, doing all of those things, working in the White House, basically being in an on-call position, working 24/7. And I thought I'd left all that stress behind in Washington, D.C. when I moved back home to Detroit, Michigan. But they also, when they talked about my stress, I said, well, I really am not under stress. At least I didn't think so. Well, I asked Dr. Hill, I said, do you think I should start seeing a therapist? My specialists are asking me about stress. And he says, I'm going to send you a test. I'm going to send you the Holmes raw test. And if I'm mispronouncing that, let me know. And
You're
he
right.
said, take the test, let me know what your score is. And so I took the test. So, Madam Producer, Toya, could you put the test up on the screen? I think you have it there. Ah, yes, absolutely. So I'm going to let Dr. Hill kind of walk us through why this stress test is a very good tool. And then I'm going to cut back to the things that I zoomed in, and that's how I figured out what the stressors were. So, Dr. Hill, let's talk about the Holmes Raw test. What is its origin, and when is it used?
First of all, I want to say you look beautiful tonight, and I want to thank you so very much for inviting me on your show here. And it's been a wonderful pleasure to meet your production staff and all these Floridians at this time. So thank you so much, Miss Janis Hazel. And I appreciate not only your friendship, but also our professional collegial relationship. So thank you so much. And so thank you. All right. Gracias,
Thank you. And
senorita.
let me just say, Dr. Hill has been so kind as to be a subject matter expert to some of the shows that I produce here in the Detroit area, particularly when COVID-19 was at its height. And people were really experiencing a lot of problems being secluded, separated from their regular regimen and the workplace. And he really walked our listeners and viewers through that. So please continue, Dr. Hill.
Okay. Yes. And so, and we've all come out of this time period where we've been highly stressed. You know, it's many people, it almost traumatized the world. COVID-19 changed the world as we knew it. And it has not returned. It won't return to the same. It's a little bit different than it was, and as the world continues to evolve. But everybody feels some level of stress. Stress is what you feel when you have to handle more than you're used to. All right. When you're stressed, your body responds as though you're in danger. It creates hormones that speed up your heart rate, and it makes you breathe faster, and it gives you a burst of energy for fight or flight behavior that existed within us from time immemorial when we were Cro-Magnon men and women. Uh, when there was a saber-toothed tiger in front of us, and he had to either fight that tiger or figure out if we could outrun it. All right, so that's stress. But the challenge occurs when there's no saber-toothed tiger, and someone has pulled a trigger upon us. Now, this instrument,
I think Dr. Hill got a little frozen, his screen. Can you hear us? Dr. Hill, can you hear us? Are you okay? Okay, his screen is frozen right now, so we're going to keep going. As you can see, the Holmes Raw test is on the screen, and he was talking about the fight, flight or fight syndrome that we have to do frequently. And he'll be back soon. I'm sure he'll log back in. Um, but I'll kind of run down here some of the questions that are embedded in here. Talk about um, finances. Have you taken on any finances that have stressed you out? Dr. Hill, you're back. Wonderful. We saw that your screen was frozen. Oh, okay. I think you're still frozen. I don't know if you can hear us because we can't hear you just yet. Okay, I see some movement. Okay, great. You're back. Wonderful. And now I think you're muted. Yep, we can see you, but we can't hear you. Is he muted? Nope, still can't hear you. Oh, okay. So he'll go out and come back in, and we will do that. But some of the questions, hopefully you can see it on your screen, and I'm sure he'll let us know a website where you might be able to get this. Some of the questions that were on there really didn't apply to me until I looked at finances. Well, no, I wasn't having any problems with finances. I had just sold my Washington, D.C. house. So that took a big level of stress off, but that really wasn't stressing me out that much. But there was a question about, have any members of your household or members of your family become ill within the last year? And I had to think about it. And yes, that was the case. And helping to take care of a senior relative who had undergone a traumatic injury and completely changed their life. And I didn't realize that that was stressing me out, unlike when I was managing my parents' illnesses. And I had more control over that. I had power of attorney. I was executor of their estates. But having to go through another person, which was a family member, for this relative to help them. And I have to say that relative did not handle business the way that I do. Dr. Hill, you're back. I think we lost you a couple of times. Great. Can you hear us?
Yes,
Oh, wonderful.
yes,
Okay, you were frozen.
yes, I can. You
Wonderful.
hear
So I was
me?
just telling the audience,
Okay,
yes, we can
okay,
hear you fine now. Yes, so why don't you continue and we'll go back. I was
okay,
just telling the audience about how
okay.
I took the stress test, but go ahead and walk us through the stress test.
Right, right, okay. So yes, I remember the circumstance as you described it to me, and I recommended this tool because it's prescriptive in assessing the circumstance, where the stress is coming from, and also in prescribing some helpful activities that you can to begin to reduce the stress. So what Holmes and Rod did was identified 43 experiences that many of us have just in the normal bump and grinds of life, things that are going to happen. The number, and they attributed a number to each one of these events that happen in our life pretty regularly. And they had individuals mark off which ones of these events had happened in the last year. So within the last year, uh, did you have the death of a spouse? That's the number one. That's the highest. They attributed the highest number of stress points to death of a spouse. Quickly followed by divorce, and then on down to things that even some positive things like promotion on a job, like death of a spouse is 100 points. Uh, a major change in the financial state is 38 points. And on down to son and daughter leaving home, 31 points. Taking on a mortgage, 31 points. Even if you get a promotion or you buy a new home or you get married or you have a baby, all of these are stressful, some positive, some negative. But the combination of the things that have happened in the last year, life changing events, after adding those numbers up, if you had 150 points or less,
I think you're freezing a little bit there. Okay.
it means
Can
there's
you
a
hear us?
relatively low induced, but I'm seemingly going in and out. Okay. Uh, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. If you had more than 150 points and less than 300, that was a 50% chance that you would have a stress induced health circumstance. And if you have more than 300 points, that is creates an 80% chance that you could have a stress-induced health circumstance within the next 2 years. So what this they did was tie the body, mind, and spirit together in terms of reactions to stress circumstances and how it manifests in the human body. So when you talked about the vitiligo, the tinnitus, all right, the facial movements, all stress responses, stress-induced health-related responses. We don't often realize even living in unforgiveness and being unforgiving and being angry can cause gastrointestinal disorders, can cause cancer. It can cause a variety, especially during the COVID era, a lowering of our ability to fight off disease, our immune systems, and so all of these things are tied together, and so it's so important for us to take care of ourselves in terms of body, mind, and spirit connection. And when it used to be that people did diagnosis in a vacuum or in a in a vacuum. So the physician would and would give you your diagnosis, but they wouldn't take into context all the other things that were happening in your life, the spiritual side of things, the psychological side of things. But now we're doing integrative health. So we're all working together and looking at the human being within all these different arenas, body, mind, and spirit, because one is going to.
The other. Dr. Hill's screen is freezing a little bit, so I'm not sure if he can hear us, but I want to just mention, he just talked about gastrointestinal issues that people can have. And I have a friend who I told I was going to do this show on stress, and she talked about how during the height of COVID, when her mother became ill, but it wasn't because she had COVID, it was some other illnesses. Her mother was in her 80s, late 80s, and she had to go into the hospital. And my friend also was experiencing gastrointestinal issues that came about because of a lot of the stress she was under taking care of her mother. I believe her mother was unable to walk. And so, that's changing an adult diaper, that's making sure that all of her meals are prepared and just doing all of those things as a caregiver. And she said that she developed diverticulitis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is a gastrointestinal bowel issue. And it can express itself in either diarrhea or it can express itself in constipation. And she said that she had experienced the diarrhea. So here she is, a 60-year-old woman who now is wearing an adult diaper because of her bowel situation. And all of that was stress related. And right after she said she talked to her mother, and her mother, they had assessed and diagnosed her issue, provided the medication she needed, and she was going to be released. However, my friend had to go into the hospital emergency to deal with this diverticulitis. And then she was able to get released the next day, went to pick up her mother, and her mother died while she was still in the hospital. And so that brought on even more stress. So we definitely have to be careful of how we manage things. And what was not on the list, or I would have to look to see, is it on the list, is caregiving. Now, caregiving comes in the range of caregiving. We usually think of caregiving for our children, but there's also caregiving for our elders, for members of our family. And on the home's raw stress test, gaining a new family member, birth, adoption, older adult moving in, death of a friend, close friend, foreclosure on a mortgage or loan, in-law troubles, beginning or ceasing formal schooling, lots of things like that. And the thing that changed in her life was having to become a caregiver for her mother. Dr. Hill, thanks you for coming back. I'm sorry you're experiencing some technical bandwidth issues, I think. I was just telling the audience how a friend of mine was experiencing a gastrointestinal problems, which you had mentioned that before your screen froze. She was experiencing diverticulitis, I think is how you pronounce it, because she was a
Mhm.
caregiver for her elder mother who was in her 80s, late 80s. And she started experiencing problems, which expressed itself in diarrhea. The diverticulitis could be either diarrhea or constipation. She expressed the diarrhea and had to start wearing an adult diaper. And so we, as adults, and we have to be sure that we're watching our children, have to take care and monitor our stress. And what I learned and what I say, and people know what I say, is I'm in my peace bubble. And I'm not going to allow anything, be it work related, family related, relationship related, pierce my peace bubble, because I learned how stress can really affect my health. And you hear people say things like, I'm not going to stroke out, meaning have a stroke as a result of the stress. Let's talk about that piece. You were dealing with the integrative health
Mhm.
practice that now goes on in, I guess, clinical psychologists, or when you assess someone. Let's continue on that vein.
Right, right. And so when 30 years ago on counseling was brought, came to fore, was that first I went to seminary. I was a psychology major at Michigan in undergrad. And then I worked in the field. And then I went to seminary in 1988, and I was around all these preachers, and I learned the ministry model of healing in seminary. Praying to Jesus, listening for his answer, Holy Spirit healing, praying over folks, the religious way of healing, laying on of hands. And I was at a interdenominational theological center, and then I went back immediately to the School of Psychology, the Graduate School of Education, and the counseling program. And all of a sudden, all these clinicians were there, and they had a whole different way of looking at healing, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, all this. So now I'm privy to the conversations of the preachers who say, I don't know why you're over there with all those psychologists. You don't need that. All you need is this BIBLE. Getting a PhD, I don't know why you're going to church with all those preachers. Going to church with somebody who's splitting double negatives in their sentences. And and so now I have these two worlds. And then I was in the field of education. And the physicians in their own world thought, science, medical science, the medical model is the way. When you come to a physician, obviously you have a problem. We're going to use the scientific method. We're going to prescribe some medicine because this is the medical model. And you come back and see me after you've taken this medicine. So now as the fields are evolving, I'm talking about in America and in the world, there just we need to know historically that the physicians, all of this, the reason why we named it H.O.T.E.P, the first physician, the first pharmacist, the first psychologist, and the first mortician were all one man, an architect and a black Egyptian named Imhotep 4,000 years ago, who came up with the first 200 medicines, the first two psychological diagnoses, the first medical tools, and and also did the first, create the mummies, the mummification process, the first mortician. So also created the first pyramid. This is a multi-genius named Imhotep, who was later deified. So that comes out of one man. When we move up throughout history, we go through we have the wonderful healer in Jesus. He comes along and he's setting people free. And this is God's son, as we know him as a Christian. I'm a preacher. I believe that he was born of a Virgin Mary and that he healed and he came from the Father, one with the Father. I believe that. So now we walk through history and we get to the early 1500s. The first colleges, Harvard, Yale, all the universities you see, Oxford, they were started by priests. The first test was a Jesuit priest. The first professors, they were called professors because they professed Christ. They were the educators. They started the first hospitals. They did all these things. And so there was a marriage between science and spirituality. And so when people went for healing, the minister was one and the same many times with the physician. The ministers were physicians. Okay, and now we have the age of enlightenment. The age of enlightenment in the 17th.
Oh, I think we're going to lose you again with your services. Well, I think this is going to be a good time for us to take a break. We're going to cut to a break, and we'll be right back. GoGigaWorld.com sponsors Dialogues with Dozy. Your digital appearance is everything, and they help brands expand online with the right strategy and design. And I have to tell you, I have been using GoGiga for 2 years now, and they provide excellent, expedient service. I just had to have 2 ads created for a program souvenir book. My mother's being acknowledged for her time working with youth programs, the West Side Cubs here in Detroit, back in the 1960s and 70s, as the sponsor of the Little League football team's cheerleading team. And I was trying to create something myself using online free software, but the ad specifications for this advertisement, full page and a half page for some other cousins of mine, had to be a different size. And the free software did not allow me to make changes. So I contacted GoGigaWorld.com and I asked them, can you create these ads? Here are the photos. Deadline is tomorrow. And they did. We had a few drafts go back and forth. And again, I'm in Michigan. They're in Florida, but they're a virtual entity that can work with people anywhere in the world. And also an organization that I work with, the National Reparations League. They created their website. They're fantastic. GoGigaX or GoGigaWorld.com. They are our sponsors. So we've lost Dr. Hill again. Great. Coming right back, right after the break. You're right on time. I'm sorry you're having technical difficulties, but go ahead and get right back into what you were talking about.
Okay. So to just bring that around, and our time has just moved so quickly with these in and outs, but ultimately there was a break between science and spirituality, a divorce, where the scientist direction and the religious people went in another. And so we even have the separation of church and state with the forming of, our early Constitution. So church and state and all science, and there was a separation. But what they found over the years, over the past 200, 300 years, is that they lost so much when you did not have integrated solution-based treatment of human beings, because human beings are we are holistic beings. You can't just treat the mind separate than you treat the body, separate than you treat the spirit. We are body. So the wellness movement began. Right. The stick and wellness.
Oh, your screen is freezing again. I hope we don't lose you. Your screen has frozen again, Dr. Hill, so you may have to log out and come back in again. But I'm going to pick up where he was leaving off. He was talking about talk therapy as a part of the wellness movement. And I have to say, about 15, 16 years ago, I experienced a traumatic situation. It really did traumatize me. I was in Washington, D.C., and I started losing sleep. I kept waking up at the same time every morning in the middle of the night, and I knew something was wrong. So I started going to my doctor, my primary care physician. I was lucky enough to have health insurance that allowed me to go to my doctor. And she immediately prescribed some anti-anxiety medications, immediately prescribed sleeping medications, which I had never had to take before. As I said at the beginning of the show, sleeping is one of my favorite things to do. I'm like George Costanza on Seinfeld. The only reason why I get up sometimes in the morning is to be able to take a nap later in the day. And so again, have been gone through my entire life, never having to take any anxiety or anti-anxiety medications or sleeping medications. I didn't want to start having to take medications. So that was the medical professional. So I sought out a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and not a psychiatrist. Not that there's anything wrong with psychiatrists, but I know that they prescribe medication. And I didn't want to go that route again. So I sought out a clinical psychologist who was at Georgetown University, absolutely fantastic counselor. And we just talked through all of the different aspects of this traumatic incident that I had experienced. And going through that process of talking with someone who did not know me at all, did not know my life circumstance, except for, I was telling the psychologist about my life, because of course the psychologist needed to have background. But he was a white male from the South. I'm a Black female from the North. And so our experiences in life couldn't have been more different. But he was phenomenal. And he said to me that you are really an anomaly, because most people take several months, 6 months at the least, at the minimum, to seek out a psychologist or clinical psychologist or social worker to walk through their problems. And for Black Americans, that's even longer. That's years before Black Americans really will turn towards psychology or clinical psychologists, or your pastor at your church who may be trained in social work and trying to deal with people and their life problems. And so I said, well, I knew something was wrong. I've never had a problem sleeping. So that's how the stress of that trauma expressed itself for me about 15, 16 years ago. And the talk therapy was wonderful. It really allowed me to release that stress, and I was able to get back to a normal sleeping pattern. So when Dr. Hill comes back, I do want him to be able to join in on that part of the wellness movement. But many of you out there may have recognized that when you go to your primary care physician, they've started asking you about your stress. And I know that they've asked you a number of questions. Do you have any thoughts of suicide, or do you have any thoughts of harming yourself? Dr. Hill, welcome back. I was just bringing the audience up on one of your touch points about talk therapy. And I was telling them how
Mhm.
about 15, 16 years ago, I encountered a very traumatic experience in Washington, D.C., which was disrupting my sleep. And I love sleeping. I had never had problems sleeping before. I was waking up at the same time every night in the middle of the night. And I went to my doctor, my primary care physician, who immediately, as I told my doctor about my issue of sleeping being disrupted, and she immediately prescribed medication, anti-anxiety medication, and also sleeping pills, sleeping medication, which I didn't want to take. I didn't want to become dependent on, because I never had to do that. And so a few more months down the road, I sought out a psychologist, Georgetown University, who had talk therapy. And so I know that it definitely helps, because going through that for probably about 3 or 4 months, I was able to get back to my regular sleeping pattern. So talk more about talk therapy and the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist.
Okay, sure. Talk therapy is now the purview of the psychologist and the social worker and the licensed professional counselor. Talk therapy is a process of building a relationship with your client, a positive relationship that allows them to share whatever the issue is. They'll share what the issue is, and then there are about, I would say, 50 different theoretical pathways that one can choose based on what the issue is. The primary one that most people use is cognitive behavioral therapy these days, where we do cognitive reframing, cognitive challenging, cognitive refocusing, where people are able to take the thought process that's in their mind and reshape that thought process so that they can function more effectively, overcome obstacles. Sometimes they can't change the situation they're in, but they can change how they process the situation they're in. The psychiatrist is a physician who's been trained in psychological therapy, all right? Clinical psychotherapy. Clinical psychotherapy is the brainchild of Sigmund Freud, where people have unpacked, they learn to unpack childhood stuckness. In other words, go back to your childhood. Let's understand who you are, how you developed into the person you are, and where you got stuck in your developmental process. Now, the psychiatrist is a physician. So there are endogenous psychological disorders and exogenous. Endogenous means it may be something that began inside of you, like schizophrenia has a genetic predisposition, or bipolar disorder, or you may have some abuse that may require certain levels of depression, may require some medication. All right. An exogenous circumstance, it could have been a stressful life, a divorce, a breakup. Could be, you saw something that you were not able to process, or even a stressful relationship that you're currently in on the job or with people. Those normally are for the talk therapist to help you work through relational dynamics, right? Now, so the psychologist is not a prescriber, all right? There are a couple states that are working on that now, but they are the person that looks at your circumstance and assesses a pathway for you to overcome life's challenges. All right. The social worker has been trained in talk therapy as well. Social workers come out of a different framework where they assess, assist, and refer for the most part. They provide resources to help you find the resources in your community to overcome a circumstance. They really came out of the governmental movement. All right. And so that's I hope that answers your question.
That definitely does. My mother was a social worker for, at first, the Wayne County Juvenile Court System, and then for the state of Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So I'm familiar with the social worker component. And what about pastors, ministers, priests, the clergy? What about their ability to counsel their parishioners? When should a person seek
Okay.
out counseling with their priest, their pastor, versus a psychiatrist versus a psychologist?
All right. A pastor, and I see my better half, she left a question down there. Dr. Miranda Hill left a question down there, so we'll get back. We'll be right there. We'll be right there, honey. Anyway, but
Hi, Randy.
the past, right. The pastor has been everything for the Black person for the last 300 years in America. The pastor has been the psychologist. He's been the real estate man. He's been the lawyer, the community advocate. The pastor was the only guy who was paid by the community and could not be affected, was paid by the Black community. So he was able to motivate, guide, and lead our community. He when he is counseling his flock, and even in the 21st century, the pastor is the one who gives group counseling. His sermon is group counseling every.
Oh no, I think we're going to lose him again. I think Dr. Hill, you're going to have to come back in because your bandwidth has taken you out. But as Dr. Hill was saying, the pastor, the minister in our community, the Black community, has been the end all be all for us and still is a definite resource. I know that at my church, and I belong to St. Stephen's AME Church here in Detroit and in Washington, D.C., where I lived for about 30 years. I was a member of Metropolitan AME Church, and our minister, our pastor, in terms of events, and I used to do a lot of the planning for events at the church and help people through that process. For marriages, he required you to go through marriage counseling. And so I saw the curriculum that people had to go through, and I thought it was wonderful. I did not endeavor marriage at that point in time, but I really did like the curriculum. And those are questions that I think all people should go through with their intended spouse or life partner, is a curriculum with your pastor, your priest, your imam, whatever branch of the clergy you subscribe to. Dr. Hill, welcome back.
Okay.
Was talking about the clergy, doctor, the pastor as the counselor. Please continue.
Okay. And hello, Dr. Miranda Hill. That's my better half. She's with us. Thank you for coming on tonight. The clergy and pastor has a spiritual role, and has now, there was a time where many of them, especially in the Christian church, did not accept, and just depending on your culture, mental health practitioners to counsel their congregation. But we have gotten progressive where pastors work with mental health professionals in their congregations, because they are equipped to guide a congregation, to guide a group. And I went through the 90 credits of seminary training, but we're not necessarily trained clinically, or do we have the time as a pastor to see a person once every week or once every 2 weeks and create a treatment plan and work with them through the treatment plan and all the other stops in between that clinical therapy requires. And so, but they can do a handoff and identify to their congregants referrals. Just last week, I did a seminar on effective grieving in a Baptist church in Detroit. And this Sunday, one of my students who's pastoring a Baptist church in Pontiac has asked me to do a sermon for their 98th anniversary on trauma-informed ministry. He just wrote his doctoral dissertation on trauma-informed ministry and ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And I was the on-site activities director for his doctoral dissertation committee. So the church is becoming progressive. The pandemic opened the door. When the churches were closed and people went to mental health folks, ACEs, when the ACA, American CARES Act, opened up the door for many people, for millions of people who never could through Medicaid. Now, then the churches were closed, they came to get mental health help because the Americans were traumatized. And now when the churches opened back up, oh my God, and pastors did so many funerals, a lot of them were traumatized as well.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, that facilitated and accelerated the remarriage between science and spirituality. So now pastors are welcoming health practitioners into
I was
their
telling
churches.
the audience, I was telling the audience, Dr. Hill, while you were experiencing a frozen screen, that I had experienced a traumatic situation in Washington, D.C. about 15, 16 years ago. And I went to my primary care physician, who I had had for some time, and she automatically, after I told her what happened and what was happening, which was my sleep was being disrupted. every night, the exact same time I was waking up. So she immediately prescribed anti-anxiety medication and sleeping pills. And I didn't want to go that route because I knew that the trauma is what was bothering and disrupting my sleep. So I sought out a psychologist, a white Southern male professor at Georgetown University. Couldn't be more different from me and my life experience, but it was wonderful. Could you talk, and it was talk therapy. Could you talk a little bit about, of course, Black folks, which is our primary audience? However, Dialogues with Dozy has a very diverse audience there in Florida. How long do you find Black Americans take to come to you for therapy, or in general? Because I was told by that psychologist that I was an anomaly, that typically it takes the average person, Black or white or otherwise, maybe a year or more to seek out therapy when they've had some life experience happen that was disrupting their regimen. And Black people, it took years for us to even go into therapy. So he really applauded me for coming into therapy to deal with my trauma. How long do you find it takes for Black clients to come and seek you out?
Now, now, long.
We're starting to encounter a little bandwidth issue here. Can you hear us?
I can't. We can't answer the phone fast enough.
Okay. So that's good to know that people are reaching out, and as you were saying, I think a lot of that was precipitated by COVID.
Black therapy.
Oh, I hope we're able to get the bandwidth back.
We can't. Black.
Oh, we're going to lose Dr. Hill again. His bandwidth is going to cut him out. But I did hear him say that the phones, they can't answer the phones fast enough, that they're getting a lot of people calling to come and get therapy through his company, which is H.O.T.E.P Christian Services. And Dr. Hill has a wonderful marriage between being a clinical psychologist as well as he is a trained minister. He's gone through seminary. When he comes back, and yes, on the screen, thank you, Toya, our producer, you can connect with Dr. Hill at 248-406-6526. That's 248-406-6526. And his website, you can look him up on Psychology Today, therapist. It's Ural, U-R-A-L, Hill, H-I-L-L, in Detroit, Michigan. And when he comes back, he'll give us some more tips. But talk therapy, I think, is something that we, particularly Black Americans, need to get rid of the stigma and come on into the fold of getting help when needed. When Dr. Hill comes back, I want him to touch a little bit on self-harm and suicide, because that seems to be on the rise across all communities, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, etc. Especially, they're finding it. I've been reading reports that a lot of our young people who are expressing a desire to learn more about their sexuality and maybe finding that they are transgendered or homosexual. And we're finding that we're losing a lot of young people, teenagers and college age, to suicide. There is a lifeline. Any community, any state, you can dial 988 to get information, to get counseling assistance. If you're experiencing any type of feeling of self-harm or suicide, please reach out to 988 on your phone. And that's in any state, any city. That is a funded program, just like 911. Call 988 to talk to someone if you're having a mental health crisis, and they can help you very, very easily. And that's something that we need to do. I saw something from Dr. Miranda Jones, we call her Randy, here in Detroit. She says there's a heightened prescription use in lieu of assessing the root cause of the underlying issues. heightened prescription use in lieu of assessing the root cause of the underlying issues. Thank you, Dr. Miranda Jones. And she is a pharmacist, a trained pharmacist, practicing pharmacist, as well as an attorney. And her significant other, Dr. Hill, is a clinical psychologist. And so she knows about the heavier prescription use when people should, I think, not to take any money out of your pocket, Dr. Jones, but let's find out, why are people depressed? Why are people having self-harm feelings that might lead to suicide? If anyone in your circle, anyone in your family, anyone in your workplace is saying things like, I feel like I want to kill myself, or I just don't want to be here anymore, please give them the 988 number and have them call so that we can have an intervention so that we won't lose more people to suicide. Dr. Hill, I was just talking about the suicide prevention helpline 988, which is available all across the country. And Dr. Jones, Miranda, was so wonderful to step in and talk about the heightened prescription use in lieu of assessing the root cause of the underlying issues. So let's jump back in there. So I really want us to touch on suicide and people who are looking at self-harm. There are people in our community who cut themselves. They're called cutters, and that is because they're experiencing something and they need to do something. Let's talk about suicide prevention and mental health. We can't hear you. I think you need to unmute. Okay, we still can't hear you. Try unmuting yourself. I'm not sure if you're muted or not. We can't hear you. I don't know, Madam Producer, do you have any ideas? We can't hear him. Okay, well, again, you can connect with Dr. Ural Hill at 248-406-6526, and you can look him up in the psychologytoday.com. He is listed on the psychologytoday.com website. His offices are here in Detroit, Michigan, but I'm sure with his vast network, having lived in other parts of the country, including Florida, I think at a point, can refer audience members that are in Florida to some of his colleagues or other services. And we also have these services that are app-based on your phone or your computer, which I think is a wonderful innovation out of COVID, that people are able to connect with psychologists or social workers to help them through any of their issues, be it weight gain, be it massive weight loss, be it a chronic illness or something that's troubling you. You are not alone. Free help is available 24/7. You can call or text the Lifeline at 988. No matter where you are in the country, just like you can call 911, you can call 988 for resources if you're considering self-harm. We're going to be wrapping up soon, I guess in about 7 minutes, and I do hope that Dr. Hill can rejoin us before we head out of here. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Black community, and I'm not negating our other audience members who may not be Black, but that is my experience in walking through life as a Black woman. And we also are having a drug issue, which Dr. Miranda Jones might be able to drop some knowledge in the chat about the opioid epidemic and the fentanyl that we're hearing reports on. And we have medical marijuana. We have marijuana here in the state of Michigan is legal now, and you can purchase it at various dispensaries. But I just wonder about what these drugs are being laced with, because we have lots of fentanyl overdoses. We have Narcan in our community, which is the dispensation of a drug that can help a person who is experiencing a drug overdose. Dr. Jones, Miranda Jones, do you have any thoughts you want to share with the audience about any drug overdoses, if they are self-medicating, with a medication, be it prescribed or something, unfortunately, off the street? Is there a helpline? Okay, so Dr. Jones, Miranda Jones has said, absolutely, there is a need to look at the impact of stress on physical health challenges like obesity and diabetes. Hallelujah. You're seeing all of these ads for this weight loss drug that was used for diabetes, Wegovy, some gratitude, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, Trulicity. There's a number of them that they're finding that they were for helping people with their A1C diabetes levels, but they have a side effect of helping people lose weight. Please don't buy those in the corner lot of Starbucks or the Walmart parking lot. I've been seeing reports that people who do have a prescription for these medications because of their diabetes, they're selling them for, $100, $200, $300. Ozempic, absolutely. Dr. Jones mentioned that. Do not buy Ozempic from someone you see on the street unless your doctor is prescribing it for you, either for diabetes management or for weight loss. There's lots of news out there, but please be safe when you take any medications. And so, weight, I've had troubles and challenges with weight, but I am reducing, and I'm reducing by reducing my love of sweets. I've come down 20 pounds, so I'll be reducing more without the medication. But that is kind of stressful. I gained a lot of weight while being at home during the height of COVID. And so I'm taking that off. Dr. Jones has said the quick weight loss approach is concerning because every drug has a side effect. Absolutely. You've got to read your medications, anything that you're taking. If it's for diabetes, we definitely want to control diabetes because we know that Black Americans have a higher rate of diabetes, or shall I say, have severe outcomes because of diabetes, amputations, eye problems. I think glaucoma might be a result of that as well. But you don't want to just do that quick fix of a drug. You want to also marry that with a good diet, meal plan, as well as exercise. And so for me, these 20 pounds that I lost in the last month is because my doctor, who really jumped down my throat about gaining all this weight, she said, you've got to do it. You have the tools, meaning you have the mental ability to lose the weight. And so I just stopped eating cakes and pies and cookies and ice cream every night, which is what I was doing while I was, dealing with COVID and being at home. Dr. Jones, Dr. Miranda Jones, who is a licensed pharmacist and an attorney, she said, stress is packing on the pounds, triggering emotional eating. Yes, the quickest food source is processed foods like carbohydrates. And I'm going to talk about those carbs, rice, noodles. I've laid off of those. My doctor told me you're going to have to get off carbs. And so I've been really increasing my protein. And so like tonight, steak. I had for breakfast, I had some shrimp with grits, but in moderation. And I love blackberries. And I have a wonderful salad, which is a Greek salad. And for anybody who's been in Detroit, we know we have a wonderful Greek town. So I love the Greek salads with a little bit of feta, a little blackberries, maybe some olives, and it's very filling. And then, of course, I've increased my movement because I really was just sitting at home, working from home and gaining weight. So thank you, Miranda, Dr. Jones, about letting our viewers know about the dangers of the quick weight loss, which is what these drugs are pushing on us, the Trulicity, the Ozempic. Every time we eat food, especially carbohydrates, it triggers the release of insulin. This is Dr. Miranda Jones telling us, who is a pharmacist. And so we have to be very careful of that. Both of my parents had adult onset diabetes, and so they were constantly counting the amount of bread that they eat because bread turns into sugar, which of course is an insulin issue. So you got to be careful of your bread. If you're going to various restaurants. I won't name it, but we all know those wonderful cheddar biscuits that I love. I love to eat them even more than the seafood on their menu. We've got to watch our carbs. So there are a lot of apps. There is a wonderful MyFitnessPal app that you can put on your phone that can help you integrate your diet, meaning your nutrition. And don't think of it in terms of a diet. Think of it in terms of a lifestyle change. So I love sleeping and I love eating. And that is a really bad combination of coming home and eating and then going to bed. Well, we are running out of time. And unfortunately, I don't think Dr. Hill was able to get his computer or his bandwidth. I think it was an internet bandwidth issue to get back on. But you can connect with Dr. Ural Hill, our expert, subject matter expert we had with us today. He is at 248-406-6526. And you can look him up on the internet. Just plug in Ural, Ural, L Hill, or you can look at psychologytoday.com and look up Dr. Ural Hill in Detroit, and you'll be able to find him. And one last thing from Dr. Miranda Jones Hill, our glycemic index of foods is based on how quick the food breaks down to sugar. So we got to really think about that. And again, you don't think of the beer you're drinking as a carbohydrate, but that's a lot of potatoes. Basically, is making your beer. If you're a beer drinker, if you're drinking wine or other alcohols, remember there's sugar in your wine and your other alcohols, whether it's vodka or bourbon. And me, I'd rather eat my calories than drink them. So I'm going to eat chocolate or ice cream, but you got to stay off of that, all in moderation. I am sure that I will be joining Dozel's Dialogues with Dozy again soon. This top I bought 2 months ago at an event, a wonderful play by a high school friend, and it was too tight, but I love the colors so much, I decided to buy it. And it's looser now. So that's those 20 pounds. And so I will tell you, I am going to be trying to lose 100 pounds. That's how much I gained over the 2.5 years of COVID. And so I'll keep you posted. Thank you, Dozel. Thank you, Kim. Those are our hosts. Thank you, Toya and Micaiah for GoGiga.com, GoGigaWorld.com. You've been watching Dialogues with Dozy. I'm Janis Hazel out of Detroit, Michigan, beautiful Detroit. Dr. Ural Hill was our expert, our subject matter expert. He is a trained clinical psychologist, also in Detroit. We will be back with you soon, and please be healthy, be kind, take care of yourselves, everyone. Be kind to yourselves. And if you're like me, don't think of it as a diet. Think of it as a nutrition lifestyle change. I wish I could swim across the Detroit River. I can't do that quite yet, but I will be reducing, and I will be checking in with Dialogues with Dozy. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Keep your stress down. Get into your peace bubble. Say woosah, do yoga, Pilates, ride a bike, get on a scooter, old-fashioned scooter that you're using one leg to power you. Play some soccer, softball, some basketball, whatever it is that you do to keep your stress down and keep out of toxic relationships, be it family, be it workplace. I have changed jobs because of the toxic workplaces. You have to take care of yourself. Your mental health is primary because that will impact your physical health. Everyone, have a wonderful evening. Be kind to yourselves. Peace.